It's our most populous and diverse city and wants to be the world's most livable city. But housing, infrastructure and governance are all under pressure. And what does that diversity mean for Auckland's residents? What is the future of Tamaki Makaurau? I'm Megan Whelan and this is Great Ideas. Last season we looked at the revolutionary ideas of the past. This time round we're asking what the great ideas of the future will be. We'll look at leisure and families and work. This week though, the future of Auckland. I'm joined by three knowledgeable people from AUT and I've asked them to tell us their favourite place in Auckland.
Kia ora tātou, I'm Kylie Quince. I'm Senior Lecturer at the School of Law at AUT. My favourite place in Auckland, Puke Tāpapa, Mount Roskill, that's my hood.
My name's John Tukey. I'm Professor of Construction at AUT. My favourite place is not actually in Auckland City. It's the Hallertau Brew Bar out in West Auckland, and very good beer.
Hi, kia ora. My name's Kath Conn. I'm Senior Lecturer in Public Health. My favourite place has to be Long Bay Beach, which is gorgeous, and the surrounding area where I walk often at weekends.
Excellent. So, in preparing for these podcasts, I did lots of research and I read lots of things and I watched videos on the internet. And I came to Auckland, and despite the fact that in some of them we're talking about the future of work and the future of play, this felt like the biggest one. This felt like the most complicated one. Why is Auckland so complicated, Kylie?
Why is Auckland complicated? Because it's big, because it's diverse, because it's an isthmus. You know, we literally strand two moana. It's home to tangata whenua, to migrants. It's a huge place with huge aspirations. It's a food basket. It's the economic capital of New Zealand. You know, it serves a lot of purposes for, a good chunk of our country.
Let's start with, John, why should the rest of New Zealand care what happens in Auckland?
We have the potential to be both a principal driver of the economy, but also a principal bomb under the economy. The reason being that we currently sit in a housing crisis, and I use that word advisedly, where we're sitting with mean household incomes sitting at around about $77,000 a year. We're sitting on Auckland house prices sitting on something just in excess of $900,000 per house for poor quality, unaffordable, cold, drafty, wet houses. And we have the potential to have a bubble that deflates in a hell of a rush if we're not very careful. And that will affect everybody in the country, come what may.
And getting everything, it's not even just that stuff, although we'll come back to housing very, very quickly because you can't avoid it. But if stuff can't move around Auckland, the rest of the country is affected. If people can't buy things in Auckland, the rest of the country is affected. Kath, if the health of the people in Auckland is bad, the rest of the country is affected.
Sure. I mean, we have a large population in Auckland and we have great inequity between different parts of Auckland. You've got some fantastic areas, but they're high-income communities. And what we need to see is raising the bar so that those areas where low-income communities live have a different kind of lifestyle. And what we're seeing is some very livable areas and then other areas which lack that livability. And so how can we look at both of those and say, look, hang on, this is not good enough?
So, housing. It seems to be the biggest issue. It seems like every day there is a story about housing in Auckland. The average cost of a house in the Auckland region has increased by 110% since 2008, while the average weekly take-home pay has gone up by 23%, so 5 times the rate of increase for housing to pay. The poorest 20% of people, a quarter of them, are spending 50% of their income on housing. John, this is a huge question. How do we fix this?
Solve it, John. Solve it.
Yeah, no pressure. No pressure. The problem at the moment is we have a complete mismatch between our ability as a society, as an industry, to deliver the housing needs that we have and our expectations. So on the one hand, in terms of delivery, we are currently consenting 10,000 homes a year, delivering 7,200 or so homes a year. This is after 8 years of growth since the end of the global financial crisis, 2008. So as we sit here now, we've ramped up over a period of time, and we're hitting this peak of 7,200. We need, according to the housing plan, something like 14 to 15,000, and that's actually going up per year. So in effect, what we've got is a situation where we have a finite capacity of the industry. we've got the need for double the needs in terms of, or double the delivery rather, in terms of total number of houses built, against a background where the industry itself has got flatline or declining productivity. So we're presented with a simple binary solution set. We either double the size of the workforce or double the productivity of the industry. Either, or somewhere in the spectrum in between is what we've got to achieve. And at the moment, we're not, as an industry or as a society, investing in that in any meaningful way.
Because that sounds, my first thought was, that sounds expensive.
It is expensive, but again, what you're talking about, the reason why housing is emotive is because it has a massive a social dimension associated with housing. Fine, get that. The issue is not that per se, it's the fact that we as a society are expecting commercial entities, construction companies, to step up and build affordable homes. The reality check is this: when we talk about affordable homes, we're not talking about affordable to the builder, we're talking about affordable for the purchaser. The builder will build a 150 square metre home and it'll cost him $3,400 or so per square metre. If he builds a 250 square metre home, it will probably cost about $2,000 a square, with a lot bigger margin on the other end. So what would impel a builder to build small homes that are affordable to the end user? Not much.
Okay, that is not a point I've heard before. So basically, it is in the interests of the construction companies to keep building, to keep the quarter acre dream alive.
It's not about the quarter acre dream. It's about the biggest possible house you can sit
on. The McMansion.
Well, it's a McMansion sitting on a relatively small block. The logic is actually very, very simple to explain. I recently wrote a report called The Mess We're In, and it's worth having a look at, though I know it sounds like self-promotion, but it is actually all in there. And basically the logic is this: if I increase the size or the side of a home, so I increase the linear dimensions, the cost goes up in a linear way. But the floor area goes up in a square function, and the volume, the apparent size of the place, goes up in a cube function. So by making places bigger, I lock in a lot more value very, very quickly. If I'm procuring a house, if I'm building a house, I work to a budget that I have in my head. But what are my motivations? My motivations are always going to be the same, which is the biggest possible house that I can build for the quantum of cash I've got in my pocket. So at every stage, we're always building bigger and bigger. The statistics are really interesting. If you go to the census document of 2013 for Auckland, there's actually it's really complete analysis. Over the last almost 20 years, we've seen our 2 and 3 bedroom homes, which are always the affordable bracket of the market, as a proportion of total population of homes, declining year on year. 2 and 3 bedroom homes are going down as a proportion of the total volume of dwellings. At the same time, over that same period of time, the proportion of 4, 5 and 6 bedroom homes is all going up.
And yet the average size of a household, the average number of people in the house is going down at the same time.
Oh, the logic. Oh, the joy.
Yeah, okay. So, Kath, do you think we need to, or do you think we already have given up on that quarter acre dream, house in the suburbs, nice 2-family dog and a dog and a car? Do you think we need to give that up?
I think we just need to think differently. I mean, we've got such a diverse population, and the idea that the sort of nuclear family still exists is, it's just it doesn't. It's not relevant.
We discussed this at length in the Future of Families episode, and we came to the agreement that it does not exist anymore. Yeah. And so how do we make housing for the families that do exist now?
Well, it does seem from the discussion that we're having here that something has to be done outside the commercial sector. And we always avoid talking about regulation and policy, but inevitably it's incredibly important, both local level policy, but also national level. And one of the things we're really skirting around is the fact that Auckland is growing, and that's a global trend. urbanisation is here to stay, and we're talking over the next 20 to 30 years about Auckland growing, as are many other cities. They're becoming more complex, they're more challenging, so it's not enough to say, well, the commercial sector can deal with this, or communities. And we put a lot of emphasis on individuals and communities to look after themselves. There's kind of a strong individual responsibility message, rather than a sort of more societal one. But we can see that kind of individual responsibility approach doesn't really work. If you look at all the research, we realise that putting individual responsibility on low-income communities to sort out their housing problem, or to improve their eating, or to take more exercise, it hasn't worked. And we've tried that. Rather, we need to look at the wider picture and say, look, we need environments where there's walkability, where there's cyclability. We don't want food deserts. We don't want areas where you've got very poor food choices. And we know that in parts of Auckland, you cannot walk out of your door and see outlets which have good food choices in terms of fresh food. We're surrounded by takeaway outlets. So there's something around recognising all those problems and the public sector, the private sector and communities working together.
Kaini, you've been sitting there very politely.
Just very unlike me, if you were to know. If only you were to know.
nodding on. One of the fascinating things, the facts I discovered this week, is that Auckland has a higher percentage of the country's population than almost anywhere else in the world. So our biggest city has more people in it, proportionally more people in it than anywhere other than, I think it's us and Dublin. So Auckland is about a third of the population. London, New York, Paris, all those big cities are around about 20%. That's a huge amount of the country in one place, and in one place that is really hard to get around.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the answer to that. Yes, it is. I mean, I don't know that I'm not terribly wedded to the idea of home ownership anymore, I don't think. And I say that from the privileged position of being a relatively recent home owner. And when I say owner, I mean person with huge mortgage that I am now pretty much committed to not paying off, and I'm not particularly concerned about it. But I am concerned about people living in healthy homes, safe, dry. Whether or not they own them or not is not particularly concerning to me. But I want to talk about the fact that one of the perhaps not necessarily intended consequences of maybe a social housing policy, which I am wedded to, is the idea of moving away from, in terms of talking about Auckland as a super diverse country, I think of it as a country, we're a whole jurisdiction, as a super diverse city where we're very soon also going to be one of the very few cities in the world, big cities in the world, where more than 50% of the people are born elsewhere. And one of the potential
40% now. So
which is incredible. One of the things that Professor Paul Spoonley and others have researched on in terms of the diversification of communities through migration is the concept of ethnic precincts, which I am concerned about, not in a negative sense, but because of the potential loss of opportunity of people living together, because of the fear of social distance from locational distance. And that's why I said Puketapapa, my hood, incredibly diverse community with a range of classes, incredibly ethnically diverse, means we have the best takeaways in Auckland. But it also means that my children have the benefit of being raised with people that do not look like us, that do not speak our languages. They know lots more than I ever did at 12, 13 and 14 about Islam, about communities from around the world. And so not just from technology, but from physically spending every day, not just Pasifika, Matariki and Diwali, but spending every day with people from around the world and people whose parents do very different things than their mums and dads do. And so that housing policy links to other social and cultural benefits if we mix together.
Yeah, but you're already seeing, I think, up here, pockets where there are only one ethnicity in a neighbourhood.
Mm-hmm. It most certainly is the case, but and we can all sort of point to the South Africans in up at Browns Bay, for example, or something like this, which it just has almost become a cliche. But Well, actually, what's quite interesting is some of the efforts that have been made to promote the level of mixing that you come in. There's arguments on both sides of this particular coin, obviously, depending on, to a certain degree, which side of the political spectrum you sit on and what have you. But, irrespective of which, I commend such developments as I was recently up at in Avondale at a project that's being run by the Housing Foundation. Absolutely outstanding, and what they're doing is they're developing a mix of stuff that's going to be sold privately, which is great. And it's the tradition. It's not exactly the McMansions. That would be a little unfair. It's some very nicely designed houses, 4-bedroom homes, but they're also within the same neighbourhood. They're developing a series of shared equity buildings under the sort of the housing association model that they have in the UK. And it's great. It's a great outcome as a result. And the quality of the homes is excellent. And there's a genuine level of affordability in there. So it is happening. But the problem, unfortunately, if you leave it to the private sector in its entirety, that you do get monocultures taking place.
And when you do that, you don't have, and looking at Auckland from outside, this is what it seems to be. There doesn't seem to be a connected approach to the city, that something that's happening in South Auckland is very different to something that's happening on the shore.
Well, it is.
And I think the other thing about that is that if you look at from a public health point of view, a lot of the good development has happened in and around the city centre. I mean, if you look at the sort of walkability that's been created around the Wynyard Quarter or along Queen Street, and the discussions about the Sky Path, which are absolutely fantastic. And I don't know how much of that is brand Auckland, because outsiders will see the city centre. But where are those developments happening around, in the areas where people live? Where is that ability for kids to walk out of the house and not be choking on congestion from traffic, pollution, and instead having a place to walk where they don't have that? And if you look at the North Shore, it was built, the houses were built with no pathways connecting them down to the beach, for instance. I mean, there's a few sections, but as someone I take the bus all the time and I walk, there's very few opportunities for me to walk, which is not alongside the road.
And a lot of those new sort of housing areas on the fringes, heading out towards rural Auckland, there's houses being built, but there's no roads being built. There's no pipes. So there's, John, you probably know a lot about this. There's space for the houses, but not the infrastructure for the houses to go there. So there's 16,000 houses a year, as well as actually the industry being able to build them. You also need the pipes to connect to them and the roads to connect to them.
Horizontal infrastructure is always extremely expensive. It's the reason why any city planner will tell you that they want to go high and they want to go condensed in order to minimise this sort of issue for a range of reasons, not least of which is the expense. Yeah, there's no question about it. These external areas have that problem, but the issue is actually not so much that. It's if you look at how politicians, particularly the current government, have been playing this, it's all about land. I mean, literally, the refrain is always land, 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 and it's just not. It's not necessarily the case, because we're dealing with a massively complex issue. I mean, we've talked about the various different elements to this massively complex issue, and it's actually a series of complex issues. It's not just a complex problem; it's a fiendish problem. There's lots of layers to it, all of which are complex in their own right. As we sit and we look at how things are being developed, question, why is housing unaffordable? Answer, because land is expensive. Why is land expensive? Well, because it's developed and released onto the market at a rate that's designed to support the current selling price. That doesn't affect that's not a positive effect on affordability at all. Even if you look at something like, for example, the Hobsonville Point, or sort of Hobsonville Land Company, which is a quango really in effect, because it's basically selling governmental land. Do they develop and release all the land in one blow? No, they don't. They actually release it out in order to maximise, or not necessarily maximise, but also in order to sustain land prices so they don't collapse it. So you've got this sort of situation where even the efforts to address the problem are not really addressing the problem. So, we have this huge complex issue. There's no question about it. Horizontal infrastructure is going to be a major bone of contention for us. You try travelling from the west. I live in the West Auckland, and I'm going even further West Auckland. And everything goes down one road. There's no plan B. You don't have the options. And I mean, even on the northwestern at the moment, following a massive upgrade that took years to put in place, there's no bus lane. Discuss.
Yes, absolutely. I mean,
And that's the sort of piecemeal approach, which ultimately is not going to get ahead of the problem, because all we're doing is we're increasing infrastructure to a level where it should have been 30 years ago.
Wow. Kylie, I want to go back to that point about governance, and there seems to still be such a conflict between the local government here and central government. Is there a way to get them together, get them in a room and, buy them a bottle of wine?
That's a really good question, and I honestly don't know the answer to that. But one thing that I think is, so we obviously need to rely upon central government to pay for major infrastructure. That's just a given. And given the force of numbers of Auckland that we've already talked about, that's, again, a given. So we should be due a certain, part of the putia of the fund, purely because of the extent of the population, but also because of the nature of the population. Not only, people always say that Auckland's is the biggest Polynesian city in the world. It's not. Honolulu is, but it is still significant. More Polynesian people, more in terms of percentage of the population. Most Polynesian people in New Zealand, Māori and Pacifica people, live in Auckland. They are also the most marginalised. You look at the deprivation index indicators. So more money needs to be spent on those populations in terms of their social, economic, cultural and environmental needs. So that's how we need to be lobbying central government, is not just there are more of us, but there are more of us with more complex and diverse needs in Tamaki Makaurau than elsewhere.
John, the figure that gets bandied around is that there needs to be $20 billion spent on Auckland by 2040. The government has mostly said, well, that's up to you, Auckland Council. Is that the way is Kylie's argument the way to win the fight?
Maybe. It's coming down firmly on the fence at that point. It may be the issue. Without a doubt, the city remains to be and will be for the foreseeable future the core of economic activity as far as the country is concerned. That's not going to go away. It's going to be the hub. It's going to be the main draw for immigrants and indeed Kiwis in the country. A lot of the transit is going in that direction for the same economic reasons. Do we need infrastructure spend? There's no question about that. That's a given. The fact that we're talking about a train link to the airport. Now, if you go to any airport anywhere in the world, you've got multiple different mechanisms, instead of which it's maybe an $80 cab ride if you want to go that way, or a bus or whatever.
And I have to be at the airport at 6 o'clock tonight, and I'm considering that I'm probably going to have to leave at 4 o'clock to get to the airport.
Yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, exactly. And if there's a car accident, I'll miss my flight.
And there you go. And thereby is the rub. We're sitting here now, we're talking about, maybe in the future, this $2 billion, which in the global sweep of things of infrastructure spend is relatively speaking minor stuff. Maybe in another 12 years, was it, or something like this, or 15 years? Actually the infrastructure we need now, but unfortunately it's never going to work that way. We sit here and we're not getting ahead of the problem. All we're doing is putting the sticking plaster over the minor wound, as it were, and we're dealing with it, we're living with it, we're taking the concrete pill, metaphorically speaking, and push through. And that's where we sit at the moment. But there's stuff that's breaking. As an example, if you look at the Harbour Bridge, okay, great. We've got the Nippon clip-ons and all that sort of stuff. We've expanded its life. We've extended its life. We talk every few years about the need for a second harbour crossing. It's going very quiet. You can hear the crickets in the distance. Nobody wants to commit to that. There are when it comes to large infrastructure projects, because they are multi-year, inevitably they become multi-government. So, when you're dealing with a governmental cycle or an electoral cycle of 3 years in duration, it's very hard to commit yourself to the sort of infrastructure spend that might take an 8 or 10 year type of multi-jurisdictional.
And to commit to paying for it, because to pay for it you have to either get the council more debt, which Auckland Council currently can't do, or you need to raise rates, which every mayor who's tried to do that.
Not necessarily. Because it's a national issue, and because we could see Auckland growing, maybe doubling in size by about 2040, we really need to be much more ambitious in the way we capture wealth. Wealth is not distributed well in this country, and there are many commentators now looking at 21st century wealth distribution mechanisms. Someone like Piketty, the French economist, has talked about global the global need to capture the wealth of the richest 10% of the population. And it's the same for New Zealand. Just saying that you're going to increase rates for everybody is not the answer. We've got to have something much more radical.
I think, it's sorry to interrupt, but I think one of the things that really concerns me is when we get the politicians going for a polemic of, well, let's build a new stadium. And this is one of those moments where you just go, seriously? We're sitting here, we're talking about the lack, we need a new harbour crossing, we need all these different things. We've got a city rail link that's just going to come online. When it comes online, it will be at peak capacity. It won't be able to cope with any more. So we're building infrastructure, major investment, that's maxed out. That's not future-proofing. So we're in that situation, but we're quite happy to entertain the concept of a $1.2 billion crater that's built in the harbour, which even made me laugh. Why? Oh, good grief.
Kylie, you mentioned complex and diverse needs. A lot of Auckland Māori and actually a lot of Auckland Pacifica people don't whakapapa to any of the local iwi. They don't have connections here locally. That's got to have something to do with those diverse needs.
Hugely complicated web of relationships, but that's how we define who we are as Māori and Polynesian peoples is by our relationships to one another. So very small percentage of Auckland Māori are tangata whenua, are any of the 19 tangata whenua rōpū or groups of Auckland, which means the vast majority are like us, like myself, taurāhere, manuhiri, people from other places. So that means we have relationships with each other as taurāhere, relationships with the tangata whenua groups, relationships with central government and local government. And so the challenge for the governance structures of Auckland and of central government are to manage those relationships. And I actually think they've done a pretty good job since the restructuring of the super city with the legislation in 2010. The Independent Māori Statutory Board is coming into its own, released a pretty significant report on Māori and our aspirations for Auckland last year, and has done a really good job of articulating those complicated relationships in a way that uses Māori values. So looking at the social, economic, cultural and environmental needs of Māori using a Māori, tikanga Māori, kaupapa Māori framework of wairuatanga, of whanaungatanga, of manaakitanga. How do we look after one another? How do we host people from as Māori, host people from other nations in Tamaki Makaurau. So I think, that's one really positive step of the exponential growth of Auckland and its peoples is I think we're heading in the right direction there. And I think that's probably a good model for other local and regional bodies. Other bodies are looking at, having set council seats as they do in the Bay of Plenty. But I think that statutory board's doing a pretty good job.
There is a lot of people still falling through the cracks, though.
Indeed. If there's one thing I could say about the board is the lack of diversity on the board. So there are 9 statutory members. There is a balance between mana whenua groups, so 9 members, 7 and 2 taurāhere members, but they're all old men. There's one wahine, so poor gender representation, and they're all old, and if there's one defining feature of the Māori and Pacifica populations of Auckland is that almost half of them are under 25. So the youth voice in terms of how are we constructing these social, economic and cultural environments and for who needs to be for them. And even, as a 45-year-old, when I talk to my teenagers, they roll their eyes when I talk about what I think they might want, and I think I'm pretty cool. They don't.
I'm sure they actually do. I want to sum this up. We did get to nearly any of the topics I talked about. I wrote on the notes, which I totally expected, because as soon as you start talking about housing, you go down as what was the fiendish problem you said, John. I like that. How do we get people out of Auckland? So if we want to manage the growth of the city and grow the regions, because some of our regions are really struggling, how do we get people out of the city? How do we encourage them to leave? Kath, I'm picking on you first.
I feel that what's been missing to some extent from this discussion is technology. We're going to see some huge change around the the abilities of technology, both in terms of the housing, but also in terms of things like employment. We're going to see massive restructuring of employment in Auckland, and it may be that with the Internet of Things and with the almost the return of manufacturing from the outsourcing to Asia, returning to rich countries on the basis that technology makes it possible to have a manufacturing industry and to have service industries which are outside the city. For me, technology has to be the way to, if you like, decentralise from cities, and for people to have communities that are very smart, technology-based communities outside Auckland. But it can't be going back. It can't be going back to the past. It's about moving forward and using technology to do that.
Yeah, I'd agree. Inevitably, we're going to have to think in terms of investing in the types of technologies which allow remote working, and so we don't actually have to physically shift hundreds of thousands of people into the city on a daily basis to sit in an office and then go home again. So, no question about it, that's going to be part of it. There's a wider issue though with regard to I'm going to weave in the housing once more, which is we're going to have to redefine the nature of what quarter acre living experience is. So it's quarter acre living in a quarter of the space. So we're going to have to think smarter about how to do that. And as soon as you start getting to a point where you can develop communities and develop housing and develop all the other infrastructure around those, which allow remote working, which allow people to live in an area with optimal transportation infrastructure and so on, for them to be able to live effectively, then we'll do well. I mean, that obviously increasingly we'll see things like, you've got. We all use it, teleconferencing. Skype has become a staple of the business community. That's what we do now, as well as delivery of certain things. So, are we physically required to be present and so on? So we're going to have to take away aspects or rethink aspects of the presenteeism culture, where I was in my office, therefore I was working. That is not the case. There will be increasing amounts of part-time work, for example, remoted out and in a piecework format. Why? Because, actually, part-timers are the most productive elements of any society, always. So there'll be a range of changes associated with how business will be done, how lectures will be given at a university, how everything else is going to happen as well. So no question about it. Technology is where we go, and it's going to happen. It has to.
All I would add to that is, if you want people to leave Auckland and go to the provinces, make them give them season tickets to the Blues and the Warriors. They'll flee pretty quickly.
Why are your sports teams so bad?
Oh, that was me. That was me. That was brutal.
I'm a day one Warrior supporter.
Oh, you're the one.
My sins. I am the one.
Yeah,
I am the one. Yes.
My thanks to Professor Kath Conn, Kylie Quince and Professor John Tukey. Great Ideas is made in collaboration with AUT. Our sound engineer was Rangi Pawik and our executive producer is Tim Watkin. You can find more great RNZ podcasts at rnz.co.nz on iTunes, Spotify or wherever you get your favourite podcasts.